Hello.
Hello.
Linda, you are not originally from Australia, is that right?
That's correct. I'm from Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
I came out in 1982 with my family. We decided to come to Australia because of the lifestyle, really, and my health was poor.
Mm.
So that was our decision why we decided to come into Australia.
Did you come to Australia straight from Scotland?
We did,
Mm-hmm.
yes. We came to Perth, first of all. My husband had a job in Perth, a subsidiary of the company that he worked for in Scotland gave him work in Perth. However, we decided not to stay there, and we had friends who lived in Adelaide and Melbourne, and we decided to have a look at both cities, and we decided we'd like to live in Adelaide, and my husband was offered work, so that was the deciding factor.
Right, so that determined your choice.
That
Friends, location, yeah.
That and also
job, of course.
Job and also house prices. That was another thing, because in Melbourne, and my husband also went to Sydney because the company he worked for had a subsidiary there, but it was the house prices and an opportunity of a job that decided us on Adelaide.
And when was it when you relocated?
1982.
So a long time, pretty long
It's a
time
long time ago.
And still the situation with house prices remains the same, right?
Yes, it is very much so. But I think the job situation has deteriorated here. I think the job situation
But it's not for good. Maybe it will improve.
No, that's true, it can, yes.
Well, do you think that a family before immigrating can do some preparation in order to improve their adaptation?
Most definitely. You really have to have a look at the job situation in Australia, and if the whatever their career is, if there is a possibility of work, and if they have contacts as well.
Yeah, of course, if you have friends,
Yes.
relatives, connections, of course that is better and easier. If there is a community, perhaps that also makes it easier for the migrants.
Yes. Well, we had to be sponsored when we came out to Australia. I'm not sure if that's the requirement now.
Was there a Scottish community at that time? Did
There
they help
was.
you?
There was. No, they didn't. Because we were British, we immediately went on to Centrelink payment, and because we had friends here, those friends and their church were very supportive to us.
Was it an Anglican church that helped
It
you?
was a uniting church.
Do you think that problems that immigrants face are the same regardless of place, time, origin, or does it differ?
I would think it differs a bit. I think, now I think it's harder to come into Australia than it was when my husband and I came in. It took us 3 years to come into Australia because of job requirements. I think language and culture
It is definitely a barrier for some nations.
for some people.
Well, but not for you. It wasn't
No.
in your case.
Not
luckily.
in mine, not in mine, but I do think for other nationalities it is very difficult. It adds to the difficulties of settling.
True. Well, on the one hand, the technological process, all the emails, scans, it makes the whole process faster, definitely.
Yes.
Less expensive, of course, rather than having to post your packages of documents over the ocean. So certainly it does help. But on the other hand, of course, all the lengthy stages, they still remain. You have to go through these stages.
Yes. And I suspect with technology now, people can access more information.
That's also true, yes.
As long as they know how to access it. Being able to find it. I would imagine there is more opportunity to get that information and perhaps have a clearer knowledge of the places they think they might like to live or work.
Yeah, I think that the more research you do beforehand, the easier it is for you
Most
then.
definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely. And perhaps, I know when we were coming out, originally, we didn't think we could get a transfer with my husband's work, and both of us were applying to companies for work. I suspect, again, that might be easier to get some information just because of email.
It would be handy, of course. Maybe you can sort of get to know what are your job prospects.
Yes.
Ideally, of course, if you come for a ready position, if somebody is waiting for you, that's ideal.
Well, yes, yes. We didn't, when we came, although my husband had work, the company didn't pay for his move over here. And he decided not to take that work because we went to Perth and we decided to come to Adelaide and have a look at Melbourne and Sydney as well. We decided at that time not to stay in Perth because we felt it was too far away from people that we knew.
Right.
And I guess that was the draw card. We had some people here who we knew and wanted to be near to them, and it was very beneficial to us.
And at that time you also had children, is that right?
I had 2 children, and then a year after we came I had a 3rd child.
And how old were your 2 children when you relocated?
They were 8, and 2 boys, 8 and 3.
Well, for the 3-year-old, I suppose it didn't matter much if the mum was nearby, but what about for the schoolboy?
I think probably in a way he settled well, because I think he was a novelty because he was from Scotland and he liked the Australian lifestyle. The 3-year-old, he suffered from separation anxiety. He found it difficult at first, but you know, whether he would have been like that at home in Scotland, I'm not sure. When he started kindy, he was very unhappy, and I think it was a fear because he had left so much behind.
Yeah, just so many different changes at the same time, and all that together that added up to the anxiety syndrome.
And perhaps being that age, he had less of an understanding of what was happening. We left our dog in Britain, and he thought the dog would come when our furniture came, and of course it didn't. And so it was difficult for him at the beginning to settle. He liked the lifestyle, you know, the beach, and he had friends to play with, but leaving home was tricky for him. And I don't, as I say, I'm not sure whether that would have been the case even in Scotland.
Well, working with children and with youth, can you give some advice for parents about how to prepare children for the move? Children of different ages, perhaps. What kind of words have to be said? What kind of strategy has to be followed?
Well, I would certainly be letting them see as much as possible on the websites, on the internet, about what the country can offer. And also perhaps explaining to them that they might have certain feelings about coming and miss certain things, and even certainly within our family we spoke about missing certain things, you know, missing our old home and missing our friends and missing some things that we did, and missing our family because we left family behind. Being quite open about that, and just being aware when perhaps there were certain behaviours that might have been connected with their sense of loss. But I think children do adapt, or young children adapt reasonably quickly when they feel secure, you know, in their home, wherever they're living. If some of their belongings come, maybe not all of them. If their parents, or at least one of their parents, is around a lot of the time, and just explaining to them clearly what's happening.
Talking over the situation,
yes,
your own feelings, right?
Yes, yes, and perhaps not rushing into maybe exposing them to too many new things too quickly, so that they have a secure base, and just being patient with them, because what they might have adjusted to very quickly at home, it might take a bit longer, I would think. But we found our son, when he went to school, once he was settled in school and had established friends, he was very happy with Australia. And we of course live near the beach now, and but we didn't even live near the beach then. And moving into near the beach and enjoying what the beach and the weather had to offer, he adjusted to that really well, because he liked being outdoors, and we didn't have so much of that in the UK. And our younger son, he just settled in time, but he actually was the one who settled less quickly to the situation.
Linda, can you point out the time when you started calling Australia your home?
My husband settled immediately, and he had no feelings that he needed to hurry back home again. For me, I was terribly homesick, even though eventually we bought our own home, and with a mortgage, but we lived in rented accommodation, which was very comfortable, and then we bought a home. But I think it was probably maybe 2 years before I felt more comfortable with living in Australia, and just establishing myself.
So just over the time, it came naturally, right?
And I think that depends on each individual.
Of course, it is very individual.
I think
it depends
it's
on
very
the family,
personal.
on place where you live.
And I think the person as well. You know, some people, I think, adapt to the present very quickly and can focus on that, whereas other people, it takes them a bit longer. They miss their families. I think probably their families, and the friends that I'd had all my life. Some of them. So I did miss them. But as I began to make friends here, and when you're fortunate enough to have a family, to have children, that absorbs your time as well, and you meet people that way. You meet people through your children, through
absolutely
kindy, interests, school, all those things. That does help. The environment of school and community does help. It makes a difference, and you start to establish yourself.
Well, Australia is very far, very remote from everything.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you travel back home often?
No. We were 4 years before we went back to the UK. And, I had family in South Africa as well. So I think we went back to the UK after 4 years. And I think when I came back after that 4 years, that was when I started calling Australia my home as well. It became home, because I realised in that 4 years I had also changed, and there were aspects of Australia that the reasons that we came were quite obvious when I went back to the UK. And we went back in the winter time. And it was very obvious. Life in Australia was much easier for living. And our children had become Australian. Our children didn't particularly like Scotland. They didn't particularly like the lifestyle of Scotland. They enjoyed Australia. And their life was in Australia.
How would you describe Australian lifestyle?
For me, Australia is a very privileged lifestyle. We are very lucky.
Fair enough, yeah.
We are very lucky in Australia. I think in Australia, even people who don't have a lot more than some people have in other countries. And for me, I felt very privileged to live here. My lifestyle is very lucky. I'm very lucky. And yet I'm a middle class. I'm not extremely wealthy, but I'm very comfortable.
And on the first place, from the very beginning, why, out of all countries, why did you choose Australia to come to?
Because that was the only place that would accept us.
Oh!
That was the only place that would accept us. We were quite, and we had lived, I had spent quite a lot of time in South Africa because my father lived there, and I loved the South African lifestyle, but the politics were problematic. And we considered, we wanted to go to somewhere that would offer us a kind of climate. And Australia.
But that was the place, yeah, in many regards.
Australia met that. Although distance was significantly far, Australia made that.
Yeah, and Australia is the country of immigrants, of newcomers, right?
Yes.
And from what you see, how does Australia treat its people, I mean the newcoming people?
Well, I think there are opportunities for people. I think it can be tricky, it can be difficult. There are, as my understanding, there is help for people.
Yeah. Support. Different, diverse in different areas of life.
I think education can be a bit of a difficulty because people who come from other countries who are very highly qualified, but their qualifications are not necessarily recognised in Australia, and so they have to do more study. And I suppose there might not be some qualifications that meet Australian standards. I'm not sure about that, but I admire these people who come and are highly qualified, and they will take any kind of work to earn an income until they can get work in their professions.
And that is also a very interesting and specific feature about Australia. Any kind of work, like, well, labour kind of work, it is still respected and the person can still earn quite enough. So, well, you can earn a living even doing some very basic kind of work. It's from what I observe.
Well, from what we observed when we came out from the UK, tradespeople here can earn a very good income and are very highly regarded, whereas in the UK the salary that those people earned was nothing like they could earn here. Yeah, so that's why a lot of people came out to Australia, that people who perhaps weren't skilled or were semi-skilled had great opportunity to do well here. And people who come work hard here. You know, the people who come out, who might immigrate out here, they work. They do work hard here. And for some people, they do have to restudy because their qualifications are not accepted here. My daughter is like that. She came from Iran and she had to do another 5 years study. She had to redo her study, and she had a practice in Iran.
And moreover, it's a different language.
That's
all
right.
of the medical studies
That's
in
exactly
English.
right. Yes, that's exactly right. So there is opportunity. There is, and Australia is a growing country. It is a growing country.
Yeah, and it is not reluctant to change. It welcomes change, diversity, people from different countries.
I think so. I think it's the way of the world now. That we don't live in our own.
We live in a changing
place.
world. Yeah,
we're in a changing world. That's right. And I think diversity adds to the country rather than takes away from it. The different cultures, and it just adds to.
Yeah, Australia is such a multinational, multicultural country.
It is.
Yeah, but still there are rules, and they're the same rules for everyone.
Yes.
You know? So you have to abide.
That's right, and it is important that people coming out understand what those rules are, so that they are not disheartened or disappointed when they get here, because then it becomes very hard for them.
There are sometimes, completely different rules, like a complete setting of the whole life is very different.
Right.
And still people have to come here and they have to leave behind all of their attitudes, all of their views, right?
Yes.
Like some people may come from very violent environment,
yes.
Or I don't know, Arabic people, for example, for instance, who have several wives. Can they import all of their several wives? How does it work?
I don't know. I don't know how that would work. I've got no idea. I don't.
It's practically impossible. You can't do that in Australia.
I don't know how that's.
So you have to live by Australian rules. You can only have one wife.
Well, yes, you would have to live by what is, what Australia has set down, regardless of if it wasn't the rules of the country that you came from. Once you come into Australia to live, I think a person has to be prepared to live as Australian people do, to some degree. Not taking away from their cultural diversity, but an acceptance that there are some rules in Australia which need to be adhered to, and some of those are probably very important. And if that's not appropriate, then it might be wise to rethink if Australia would work, because it may not be the right place.
Also, what's interesting about Australia is that it does offer opportunities for different people, like for the youth or for the elderly, for example, for minorities as well. Like there are different opportunities for leisure, for education, for self-improvement.
Yes, yes, there are. There is opportunity. There are struggles as well, but there is opportunity.
What kind of thing is there available for the elderly people? It can be completely different from Ukraine. Ukraine, for example, there is a pension, so of course people have some payments from the government. It is just enough to survive, basically.
Right.
Not even enough for some specific medication, unfortunately.
Right.
Very seldom they would have special clubs or some meetups. And that's basically it. So they can watch television, they can expect some visitors, their relatives perhaps.
Right. Well, a lot of the elderly people move into retirement villages.
What is that?
Well, they have to pay to go into it, and it depends on income. Some people might have to pay a larger portion if they've got a larger amount of money, and people who don't have much money, they pay part of their pension into that. So they live in a community, and they might have a small unit, but within that there is a community, and so they have the opportunity of going out together, eating together.
So there is something like a sense of belonging to
Yes.
special community,
Yes.
right? There are people of, well, the same age, the
Similar
same
ages.
income, the same background, I suppose, and they all...
Well, not necessarily the same income,
Mhm.
because as I mentioned, some people, it's relevant to how much money you have. If you don't have a lot of money, then you might pay a little,
Mhm.
and if you have a lot more money, then you pay differently.
Mhm, mhm.
So there can be a variety of backgrounds, and there are a variety of places to choose from.
Mhm.
Some places are very expensive, some places are not so expensive. So there is a variety. There is support for the elderly,
Mhm.
and a continuing growing support for that. Also they have, for people who want to remain in their own homes, they have a lot of facilities that will offer support for that to happen. Meals and people to help.
Mhm, mhm.
It's a growing interest for people to remain as long as they want to in their own homes. And economically it's more viable
Mhm.
for governments to
Right.
support people to remain as long as they can in their own environment, and better for the people if that's what they want to do for older people.
Wow, thank you very much for the
That's a
interview,
pleasure.
Linda. Mhm.
And if
It's been enjoyable, thank you for
Thank you.
talking to me.
My pleasure.
Right, goodbye.